The NHL moves fast, and some players fall off the radar quickly. From top picks to one-season wonders, these are the names you remember, but probably haven't heard in years. These are the forgotten NHL players today. Nail Yakupov, a dynamic forward from Russia, entered the hockey world with a significant fanfare following a stellar junior career in the Ontario Hockey League with the Sarnia Sting. He was drafted first overall in 2012 by the Edmonton Oilers, a mid with great expectations. At the time, the Oilers were amid a prolonged period of struggles and desperately hoped Yakupov would be the cornerstone of their rebuild. The anticipation surrounding his arrival was immense. However, Yakupov's NHL career did not unfold as many had predicted. Coaches soon grew concerned with Yakupov's defensive struggles and one-dimensional play, and his production never blossomed into the dynamic star many had envisioned. As the Oilers endured losing seasons, Yakupov became a lightning rod for criticism. By the 2014 to 2015 season, it became evident that Yakupov's development had stalled. He managed just 33 points in 81 games, which was the highest of his career. There were multiple issues in his game. Some blamed his defensive play, however the biggest issue was with Yakupov himself. NHL executive Brian Burke described Yakupov's draft interview as the worst he had ever experienced.
Yakupov went because he was the wild card, because we weren't going to take him. His draft interview was the worst interview I've ever had in my life.
Yakupov's was?
Terrible.
How come? Jeez.
Because he was defiant and obnoxious and sullen, and so I mean,
I thought them quick.
John Lilly, one of our scouts, you know those, I think, right?
Yep.
So John Lilly almost fought him in the interview. So it was not a good interview.
And if you thought that was bad, TSN's Ryan Rishog got info from an Oilers source that Yakupov was very willing to put in hard work, however only in the areas that he was already good at, or enjoyed doing. He spent the bulk of his time working on his shot, especially the one-timer, even though shooting the puck was one of the things he could already do very well. There was a refusal to work on parts of his game, which was not at an NHL level. When the reporter asked Yakupov what needs to be done to improve his game, Yakupov replied, "Nothing new, I just need to keep doing the same things I've always done." After that season, the Oilers were done with Yakupov. In 2016, after 4 up and down seasons in Edmonton, the Oilers front office traded him to St. Louis Blues for a modest return, a move that confirmed how far his stock had fallen. A change of scenery did little to revive his NHL career. He managed just 9 points with the Blues, and then a brief 2017 to 2018 stint in Colorado before no NHL team offered him a contract. At just 24 years old, Yakupov's NHL career was effectively over, a stunning outcome for a top pick. Yakupov later reflected about his time in Edmonton, citing the language barrier and lacking confidence as obstacles in his development. It is also important to note that at the time, Yakupov had many different head coaches, which may have also stunted his development. But regardless, Yakupov's NHL career was over. He returned back home to Russia in 2018, hoping to reboot his career in the KHL, and initially things looked to be moving his way. He exploded for 23 goals in his first KHL season with the powerhouse SKA St. Petersburg, rediscovering his scoring touch on a talented roster. But much like his NHL journey, Yakupov's KHL story has been one of diminishing returns. His goal total dipped to 10 the following season, and tellingly, he hasn't reached double digits in any year since. Despite the disappointments, Yakupov hasn't given up on the game he loves, stating, "The older you get, the more interesting your life and your game gets. You gain a bit of wisdom," he told a KHL interviewer, noting he's learned to ride the painful ups and downs with better perspective. Yakupov has expressed a willingness to return if a team came calling, but by now, he knows how unlikely that is. Today, Yakupov is a veteran pro, playing far from the spotlight, grateful to still be lacing up his skates, but forever carrying the label of a first overall pick who fell short. David Booth, by contrast, carries no such label, only the quiet pride of a player who refused to let injuries or obscurity end his career. In the late 2000s, David Booth looked like a cornerstone of the Florida Panthers. The hard-driving winger had broken out with a 31-goal campaign in 2008-2009, earning a reputation as a fearless scorer with a knack for the net. Panthers fans adored his work ethic from this former second-round pick, and management touted him as part of the team's future core. But fate had other ideas. Booth's career took a sharp detour on October 24, 2009, when a devastating blindside hit by Philadelphia's Mike Richards left him concussed on the ice. It was the first of several traumatic blows. He returned later that season, only to suffer yet another concussion from a head hit in 2010, and suddenly the rising star's trajectory was in jeopardy. Florida, wary of his health and needing a shakeup, dealt Booth to the Vancouver Canucks in 2011. Booth's time in Vancouver was marred by injuries, inconsistency, and off-ice intrigue. In his very first season with the Canucks, he injured his MCL on a knee-on-knee collision, and later a groin strain and an ankle surgery after a freak training mishap during the 2012 to 2013 lockout, which sidelined him for long stretches. When he did play, flashes of his old scoring touch were too often overshadowed by long dry spells. Vancouver fans, initially excited to have the American winger, grew frustrated at Booth's $4.2 million cap hit as his production lagged behind. The media weren't always kind either. Booth's personality and avid, big-game hunter made him an unusual fit in the Canucks locker room. He drew criticism for tweeting photos of himself with a bear he'd hunted, and for sharing religious views on evolution that many found odd or objectionable. Former teammates have since painted a picture of Booth as a bizarre guy with different priorities. Retired Canucks defenseman Kevin Bieksa even told a story about Booth skipping a team meeting to go hunting, hours before a game in Buffalo. Coaches couldn't find Booth, but he was literally sitting in a tree stand in Ohio, hunting deer instead of attending the pre-game skate.
One meeting that we had in Buffalo, he wasn't there, so we're calling him, and I'm like, Boother, like, we're having a meeting now, where are you? He goes, I'm in Ohio hunting white-tailed deer. He was in Ohio, he was a state over, and he was in a tree hunting deer. So just a bizarre guy. So priority was not punctuality.
By 2014, the Canucks opted out to buy out the final year of his contract. After Vancouver, Booth refused to let his NHL dream die quietly. He took a detour to the KHL in 2015, signing with Belarus Dynamo Minsk to reset his career. And by 2017, he was back for one last NHL shot. Booth earned a professional tryout with the Detroit Red Wings, remarkably nearly 2 years since his last NHL game, and impressed enough to make the team. In Detroit, now a 33-year-old depth forward, Booth embraced a new role as a mentor and fourth liner. He notched 5 points in the 28 games for the Wings in 2017 to 2018. Modest stats that nonetheless represented a personal victory. He had clawed his way back to the NHL against the odds. When no contracts came for the next season, Booth once again looked overseas. By this point, it wasn't about money or fame, it was the sheer love of hockey and competition driving him to continue. He stayed in shape and kept playing wherever he could. A stint in the Czech League, a few games in the semi-pro beer league, and elsewhere wherever he could play. As he approached his late 30s, Booth found a second wind in some of Europe's lesser-known leagues. He dominated the Norwegian League and the German League. At 39 years old, Booth was still chasing the game, signing to help a small market German club and cover for an injured player. His signing came with fanfare in Germany, in part due to his quirky reputation. Local media referenced his history as a 30-goal NHL scorer, but also his quote-unquote behavioral issues, namely the hunting escapades and that Vancouver buyout. By this point, Booth himself was self-aware about being different. He once said that he enjoys playing in remote areas and at lower levels more than the NHL spotlight. Today, at 40 years old, Booth is still playing in Hungary, with no intention of stopping anytime soon. While Booth fought to recapture a lost form due to concussions, Jonathan Cheechoo spent the remainder of his career trying to live up to one miraculous year that defied all expectations. For a brief moment, Jonathan Cheechoo was on top of the hockey world. In 2005 to 2006, the San Jose Sharks sniper from Moose Factory, Ontario, shocked the league by scoring 56 goals, earning the Rocket Richard Trophy as the NHL's leading goal scorer. Cheechoo's name became synonymous with that singular achievement. Fans in San Jose roared Cheechoo after each goal. Jonathan Cheechoo, a kid from a remote northern Ontario community, emerged as a star alongside Joe Fortin, who fed him perfect passes on the Sharks' top line. Cheechoo's accurate shot and nose for the net made him an instant fan favorite, but as sudden as his ascent was, the fall was just as swift. In the seasons following his 56-goal explosion, Cheechoo struggled to recapture that scoring ability. Opponents adjusted, injuries crept in, and the NHL's landscape shifted. By 2008, as the league tightened up defensively and Cheechoo's own body began to betray him, his numbers dipped sharply. From 56 goals to 37, then to 23. The Sharks, facing salary cap decisions and worried that Cheechoo's best days might be behind him, only at 29 years old, traded him to the Ottawa Senators in September 2009 as part of a package for superstar Downey. Cheechoo never regained his footing in Ottawa. Without Joe Fortin's playmaking and battling ongoing knee troubles, he managed just 14 points in 61 games for the Senators in 2009 to 2010. By the next fall, the one-time Rocket Richard winner found himself in the AHL. It was a humbling turn of events. Yet through it all, teammates and coaches praised Cheechoo's attitude. He remained the same modest team-first guy, and after a season in the minors, Cheechoo looked overseas for a fresh start, embarking on a journey in the KHL. From 2013 to 2017, he was lacing up for teams in Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Slovakia. In the KHL, Cheechoo reinvented himself as a savvy veteran scorer, even leading the league in points in 2014. It wasn't the NHL, but he embraced the adventure of playing abroad. By 2017, however, Cheechoo's playing days were winding down. He finished his final season, and at age 37, he knew it was time to hang up the skates. In typical Cheechoo fashion, he did it so without fanfare. In fact, he quietly waited to officially announce his retirement until early 2018, partly because he was still owed some payback from his last KHL team, and didn't want to jeopardize it by declaring himself as done. When the announcement finally came in March 2018, the Sharks honored him with a special ceremony. Doug Wilson, San Jose's GM, praised Cheechoo's remarkable journey from one of North America's remote locations to an elite NHL player, rightly noting that no matter what came after, Cheechoo would forever be a part of Sharks history, as the franchise's only 50-goal scorer and holder of numerous team records. The night of March 24th, 2018 was Jonathan Cheechoo Appreciation Night in San Jose, with a standing ovation from the crowd and the video tribute to his career. Post-retirement, Cheechoo has kept a relatively low profile, but he hasn't stayed far from the game or his roots. He settled in San Jose with his family and soon found himself back in the rinks, however this time as a youth hockey coach. By 2020, Cheechoo was coaching a house league team in San Jose, one that happened to include his young son, Jack. The same patience and positivity that made him a beloved teammate now endeared Coach Cheechoo to a new generation of kids. He's also given back to the indigenous community that produced him. He frequently returns to Moose Factory for the annual Little Native Hockey League tournament. Now 44, Cheechoo is content with a quieter life. He hasn't pursued high-profile NHL coaching or management jobs, preferring to stay close to family. He's considered possibly working as a scout or in player development, ideally for the Sharks, but only if the role fits with his family life. Cheechoo's unforgettable 56-goal season stands as one of the most incredible outliers in modern NHL history. A sudden rise to stardom followed a quiet descent into obscurity, while Cheechoo's legacy rests on one of the most unforgettable peak. Thomas Vanek carved out a career through sustained scoring and adaptability. For much of the 2000s, Thomas Vanek was one of the NHL's most feared goal scorers. The Austrian-born winger, drafted 5th overall in 2003 by the Buffalo Sabres, quickly established himself as a lethal finisher. Blessed with a wicked one-timer and uncanny scoring instincts, Vanek posted 5 30-plus goal seasons in Buffalo and became the face of the Sabres post-Drury/Briere era. In 2007, when Edmonton signed him to a massive 7-year, $50 million offer sheet, Buffalo matched the contract to keep their young star, a clear sign of how the Sabres valued him. But the contract also became a double-edged sword. Fans' expectations of Vanek grew in proportion to his paycheck, and as Buffalo's fortunes declined in the early 2010s, some frustrated supporters started scapegoating the soft-spoken sniper, Lazy Thomas, a cruel moniker referencing Vanek's perceived indifferent skating style, caught on among fans who felt he wasn't living up to his salary. However, the truth was that Vanek was an offensive force. He was never a great skater or defensive player, and when Buffalo struggled, his all-offense game drew criticism. Still, he gave the Sabres plenty, including a 40-goal season in 2008 to 2009, and remained one of the league's premier powerplay specialists. By 2013, Buffalo was rebuilding, and Vanek, on the last year of that big contract, was shipped to the New York Islanders. That season would turn into a whirlwind after a productive few months on Long Island. Vanek declined a long-term extension, and the Isles flipped him at the trade deadline to Montreal. Suddenly, Vanek found himself on a contending Canadiens squad, and he performed well down on the stretch. But a lackluster playoff showing, just 5 points in 17 games, soared some in Montreal on his effort level. Vanek chose to go home that summer of 2014, signing a 3-year deal with the Minnesota Wild, the state where he starred in college. It seemed like a perfect fit on paper, but in reality, Vanek struggled in Minnesota's system. But his skating looked a step slower in the NHL's new speed-oriented era, and the head coach, Mike Yeo, often cut Vanek's ice time, frustrated with his play without the puck. After 2 underwhelming seasons, Minnesota bought out the final year of his contract. From that point, Vanek entered the journeyman phase of his career, albeit a rather effective one. He embraced the role as a veteran, signing a string of 1-year deals and bouncing between 5 teams in his final 3 seasons, which included Detroit, Florida, Vancouver, Columbus, and a second stint in Detroit. Even as his ice time and foot speed declined, he remained a savvy offensive contributor. He had a renaissance year in 2016 to 2017, split between Detroit and Florida, posting 48 points. Teammates young and old benefited from Vanek's wealth of experience. In Vancouver, for example, he took rising stars like Bo Horvat Horvat and Brock Besser under his wing, teaching them tricks of the trade. The Canucks coach Travis Green praised Vanek's influence on the kids, noting that his hockey IQ and calm demeanor rubbed off on the locker room. Quietly, Vanek was transitioning from go-to scorer to mentor. Fittingly, his final NHL season, 2018 to 2019 with the Red Wings, saw him reach 2 milestones that meant a lot to him personally: his 1000th NHL game and his 800th career point. After 2019, Vanek, then 35, found himself without a contract. He didn't officially announce a retirement right away. In fact, as late as February 2020, he said publicly that if he wasn't signed by the trade deadline, he'd likely call it a career. Indeed, the deadline came and went, and Vanek hung up his skates. But Vanek's story didn't end when he stopped playing. After a well-earned breather, spent time with his wife and children, he found a new way to contribute to the game. In August 2023, the San Jose Sharks hired Vanek as an amateur scout, focusing on the Minnesota region. It was a somewhat surprising move. Vanek had never played for the Sharks, but the connections made sense. Sharks GM Mike Greer was a former teammate of Vanek's in Buffalo, and San Jose was looking to inject fresh eyes into their scouting department. Vanek, known for his keen offensive mind, seemed eager to unearth the next generation of talent. Thomas has always had a great feel for the game, one NHL executive said of the hire. If he applies himself in scouting the way he did as a player, he'll be a real good asset. For Vanek, the scouting gig is a chance to stay connected to hockey, without the grind of coaching or broadcasting. It's largely behind the scenes, which suits his personality. Off the ice, Vanek kept a deliberately low profile. However, he endured an uncomfortable off-ice incident back in 2014. His name surfaced in a federal gambling investigation when it was revealed he paid off gambling debts to a bookmaker during his time with the Islanders. However, Vanek was never charged with any wrongdoing. Every so often, Buffalo media will catch up with Vanek for a "Where Are They Now" piece. He expresses gratitude to Sabres fans and reflects on how different the league is today. He's particularly happy to see the influx of European talent and more emphasis on skill, trends he no doubt appreciates as a talent evaluator. Thomas's career was defined by longevity and adaptability across multiple teams and roles. In contrast, Cody Hudson never had the chance to evolve. His promising career was abruptly cut short, not by performance, but by a rare and misunderstood medical condition that robbed him of his prime. Few young players have had as eventful and ultimately tragic career as Cody Hudson. A decade ago, Cody was regarded as one of the top prospects in hockey. The Vancouver Canucks selected him 10th overall in 2008, and he proceeded to dominate the junior ranks, earning CHL Player of the Year honors and starring as Canada's captain at World Junior Championships. Canucks fans salivated over the kid, who seemed to have it all: hockey sense, leadership, and a lethal shot, alongside a maturity beyond his years. But behind the scenes, storm clouds were brewing even before his NHL journey began. A back injury suffered in the summer of 2009 led to a continuous dispute between Hudson's camp and the Canucks medical staff over its diagnosis and treatment. The tension foreshadowed a philosophical clash that would later explode into public view. After finally cracking Vancouver's lineup in 2011 to 2012 and showing flashes of brilliance as a rookie, Hudson was abruptly traded at the season's deadline to Buffalo. A shocking move given his pedigree and the team's investment. Rumors swirled that Hudson had pushed for more ice time, and the Canucks coach, Alain Vigneault, didn't trust the young center's defensive game. Whatever the truth, the trade of Hudson for fellow prospect Zach Kassian was a bombshell. Vancouver's GM called it a hockey trade, but whispers persisted that there was a personality conflict, and the Vancouver's front office doubted Hudson's character or health. In Buffalo, Hudson initially flourished, finally given a top 6 center role. He posted a 20-goal, 44-point season in 2013 to 2014, flashing the playmaking and scoring touch that had scouts drooling for years. The Sabres rewarded him with a long extension, believing he could be a pillar of their rebuild. Yet almost as quickly as he arrived, Hudson's game went into freefall. By 2014 to 2015, his production had fell to just 6 goals in 78 games, and his skating looked horrible. Critics wondered if he was another young star who'd gotten complacent after a payday, but the reality was far more devastating. Hudson was unknowingly battling with a rare genetic disorder that was snapping his energy and threatening his life. In June 2015, the Sabres, unaware of his condition, bought out the remaining years of his deal, and the once prized prospect suddenly found himself an NHL free agent with a damaged reputation. It wasn't until after he signed a 1-year deal with Nashville that the truth emerged. Struggling to keep up during the 2015 to 2016 season and experiencing alarming symptoms like extreme fatigue, muscle pain, and irregular heartbeat, Hudson underwent extensive medical testing. The diagnosis was shocking: malignant hyperthermia, a rare genetic muscle disorder involving the RYR1 gene. In simpler terms, Hudson's muscles could break down severely under stress, exactly the kind of stress high-level sports puts on the body. The condition explained everything: the mysterious decline, the constant cramping, the dizziness, and organ problems he'd quietly endured. Doctors told him point blank that continuing to play hockey could kill him. At just 26 years old, Cody Hudson had no choice but to retire, walking away in the prime of his life. They said, avoid prolonged physical activity, avoid contact sports. Basically, the job description of being in the NHL, Hudson later recounted. The news was heartbreaking, but Hudson faced it with a characteristic grace. He immediately channeled his energy into raising awareness for RYR1 related diseases and got involved with the RYR1 Foundation, connecting with other families dealing with similar disorders. The Predators organization, sympathetic to his current situation, kept him on in a capacity to help with youth hockey and community outreach. In fact, for about 5 years after leaving the NHL, Hudson worked with the Nashville's hockey programs, overseeing youth development clinics across the Southeast, teaching kids the game he could no longer play. He found a measure of peace in this routine, watching from the sidelines as the Predators chased the Stanley Cup and other young players filled the role he once hoped to play. Amazingly, that's not where the story ends. By 2023, Hudson's health had improved in ways even doctors found so unusual. A combination of a new medical regime, daily breathing exercises, and sheer will, Hudson's symptoms virtually disappeared. He weaned off the heavy muscle relaxants that had left him too drowsy to function as an athlete. After consulting with his specialists, the very ones that told him to never play again, he got a shocking green light. Medically, he was cleared to attempt a comeback. The years of rest had healed his body, and the genetic condition, while still present, was under control enough to give hockey one more try. At age 33, an age where many peers were winding down, Hudson was gearing up. In early 2024, he reached out to his old contacts in the Nashville organization. Longtime Predators development coach Scott Nickel heard the determination and excitement in Hudson's voice and arranged a professional tryout with the AHL's Milwaukee Admirals. It was a no-risk move for Milwaukee and a last shot at a dream for Hudson. And in all honesty, what followed can only be described as stuff of Hollywood. After shaking off some rust in his first couple of games, Hudson went on a tear. He scored his first pro goal in over 8 years on February 21st, 2024, almost to the day of his last NHL goal back in 2016, then proceeded to score 5 goals in a 4-game span. Admirals fans were astonished. Here was a player who hadn't played a real game in nearly a decade, suddenly looking like a star again. In 13 games with Milwaukee, Hudson tallied 6 goals and 8 assists, a point per game pace. More importantly, he was having fun. I actually feel better now than when I last played, and I quote, noting that his body finally works properly, and he was enjoying every moment of his unlikely second chance. His comeback became an inspiration far beyond hockey. The RYR1 Foundation highlighted his story as a beacon of hope, and fellow athletes with health issues reached out to applaud his courage. For Hodgson, the stats were secondary. Just the fact that he could push his body to compete again, and do so effectively, was a victory in his books. I was just trying to enjoy it because I didn't get that the first time, he reflected, recalling his initial retirement felt stolen from him. Yet the fairy tale had one more twist. In April 2024, as the Admirals pushed for the playoffs, Hodgson began experiencing familiar warning signs. Small muscle tears in his neck, and he was sitting out games once again. Not due to coaching decisions, but due to his condition creeping back in. In one particular game on April 14th, he felt his body locking up, and he knew deep down that this was it. I knew in the first period it was going to be my last game, he admitted afterward. The comeback had been beautiful, but it was also fragile and short. Rather than risk a severe relapse, Hodgson made the painful decision to step away once again, this time on his own terms. He retired again, but this retirement felt different. It felt peaceful. He had proven to himself and everyone else that he could still do it. The hockey was still in his heart and in his hands, even if his health ultimately wouldn't cooperate long term. Today, Cody is at an unique juncture. Only 35, he has lived a life of a top prospect. He continues to work with the Predators in player development and serves as an ambassador for the rare disease awareness. In a sense, Hodgson's journey is still unfinished. He didn't get the lengthy NHL career everyone projected, but he found purpose beyond the ice and even offered one of the most dramatic comebacks in recent memory. As he once said, the goal is to play in the National Hockey League, but it's nice to be an example for others as well. While Cody's career was halted by a hidden medical battle, Wojtek Wolski's path was defined by survival and comeback, overcoming both inconsistency and a life-threatening injury to find new purpose beyond the NHL. In the mid-2000s, Wojtek Wolski appeared to be on a trajectory to NHL stardom. Drafted 21st overall in 2004, by the Colorado Avalanche, the Polish-Canadian forward broke into the league with a splash. He tallied 50-plus points in each of his first 2 seasons in Colorado, dazzling with slick angles and a sniper's touch. Wolski's greatest weapon was arguably the shootout. He became one of the NHL's all-time shootout wizards, deploying jaw-dropping dekes that made him nearly automatic in breakaways. By 2010, at just 24, Wolski was a top 6 fixture for the Avs and earned a Team Canada invite to the World Championships. Yet, even then, whispers circulated about Wolski's consistency and drive. Some nights he looked like an elite scorer, other nights he drifted around on the perimeter. The Avalanche, in a playoff push in 2010, decided to sell high, trading Wolski to the Phoenix Coyotes at the deadline. Initially, the deal looked like a win for Phoenix. Wolski went on a tear with 18 points in 18 games to finish the season, helping the Coyotes into the playoffs. But that hot streak was short-lived. The following season, Wolski reverted to inconsistency and found himself shuffled to the New York Rangers. And there he collided with coach John Tortorella's demanding style. In one memorable episode, Tortorella told the press that we can't get him out of the tub, in reference to Wolski's supposed reluctance to play through pain. Wolski, nursing a minor groin injury at the time, was stung by the public jab. After a brief and uneventful stop with the Florida Panthers, Wolski's NHL journey effectively ended in 2013 at the age of 27. Still carving competition, Wolski turned to the KHL, embarking on what would become a remarkable second act. He signed with Torpedo Nizhny Novgorod in 2013 and quickly became one of their offensive leaders. The larger ice and more open style of the KHL played to Wolski's strengths, and he flourished. Over the next few years, he became a KHL star, moving to Metallurg, a powerhouse club, and winning a Gagarin Cup, the KHL championship. Ironically, it was in the KHL, thousands of miles from North America, that Wolski finally found the consistency that eluded him in the NHL. I had to learn to be a leader and bring it every night, he said in an interview reflecting on his time abroad. But Wolski's journey hit a terrifying bump in October 2016. In a KHL game, he lost his footing after a collision and went headfirst into the boards. The impact fractured his neck and injured his spinal cord. Wolski laid motionless on the ice, and there were fears that he would never walk again, let alone play hockey. Astonishingly, through surgery and extensive rehab, he not only recovered, but made a triumphant return to the ice 8 months later. His successful rehab from a broken neck is one of hockey's truly inspirational stories. The injury changed Wolski's outlook on life. He became an advocate for players' health and often spoke about how grateful he was simply to be playing again after the near paralysis experience. In 2017, he resumed play in the KHL and remarkably picked up where he left off. And when the NHL opted not to participate in the 2018 Winter Olympics, Team Canada came calling with an unlikely opportunity. Wolski, the former NHL prodigy turned to KHL veteran, was named to Canada's Olympic roster. There he earned a bronze medal, a moment he described as one of the proudest of his life. By 2019, Wolski had played 14 professional seasons across the NHL and KHL, alongside a short stint in Switzerland. At 34 years of age, with young children at home, and his body having been through a lot, he contemplated what was next. In 2020, during an appearance on the popular Bit and Chicklets podcast, Wolski made it official. He was retiring from professional hockey. "I always knew the day would come," he wrote in a heartfelt Instagram post announcing his decision. He thanked every team and coach he'd played for, even tagging a list of his former clubs from the NHL and Europe. A reflection of just how far and wide his career spanned. Since retiring, Wolski has settled in the Toronto area and shifted into a new role, a full-time dad. He often jokes that chasing around his 3 young kids is tougher than playing pro hockey. In 2022, he was introduced into the Polish Sports Hall of Fame in Toronto, a nod to his status as one of the most accomplished hockey players of Polish descent. He was, as one media outlet put it, one of the greatest shootout specialists in NHL history, yet he ended up carving out a legacy in far-flung arenas and overcoming adversity that few could imagine. Today, he carries himself with a sense of fulfillment. Asked if he has any regrets about how things turned out, Wolski responded, "Of course you wonder what if I had stuck in one place longer, but I got to play the game I love around the world. I met my wife because of hockey, and I left on my own terms. I wouldn't trade those experiences." Wolski's journey was about physical recovery and quiet perseverance. However, Steve Downey was a raw, turbulent confrontation with the emotional and psychological toll of the game, where the deepest scars weren't visible on the surface. The story of Steve Downey is one of hockey's most polarizing, a tale of a feisty agitator whose on-ice fury both built and broke his career, and who later became an outspoken critic of the very culture that molded him. As a junior with the OHL's Windsor Spitfires, he infamously attacked rookie teammate Hakim Aliou in 2005, hazing incident that became front page news and exposed the ugly underbelly of junior hockey culture.
Flyers top draft pick Steve Downey is in the center of a storm with his junior team, the OHL's Windsor Spitfires. Downey, considered a strong candidate to play for Canada at the next World Junior Championship, is said to have charged off the bench during practice yesterday and cross-checked a teammate in the mouth. Windsor's top draft pick, Hakim Aliou, went right after Downey after the cross-check. The 16-year-old lost 3 teeth because of the hit. The entire incident was apparently sparked in response to a hazing incident.
It happened, and we're going to find out why it happened. So we're investigating and trying to talk to all the players and talk to the parties that were involved, and hopefully we'll come to a resolution here in a couple of days, and everybody can move on.
Downey was suspended and castigated, but also defended by some coaches as a product of old-school hockey values. He later on would be drafted 29th overall by Philadelphia in 2005. Downey was described as a throwback, talented enough to score, but also willing to drop the gloves and throw bone-crunching hits. The Flyers organization gave him a shot. In a 2007 preseason game, before he'd officially make the NHL, Downey delivered a flying hit to Ottawa's Dean McAmmond, catching him in the head and knocking out cold. The NHL threw the book at the rookie, a 20-game suspension, one of the longest in league history for an on-ice incident. At age 20, Steve Downey was already labeled a villain. Headlines called him a thug, and even borderline psychotic. Despite the rough start, Downey managed to stick around the NHL for parts of 8 seasons, bouncing from Philadelphia to Tampa Bay, Colorado to Pittsburgh and Arizona. At his best, he was actually a useful player. In 2009 to 2010, he scored 22 goals and 46 points on a line with Steven Stamkos, all while racking up 208 penalty minutes. He played an important role in Tampa's run to the 2011 Eastern Conference Final, providing grit and secondary scoring. But the flashes of skill were often overshadowed by his volatility. Coaches and GMs wrestled with the talent versus headache calculus. Tampa learned to accept Downey's eruptions as long as he contributed. Others, like Patrick Roy in Colorado, had less patience. By his late 20s, Downey's body was breaking down from the way he played. He suffered numerous concussions, some rough estimates say well over a dozen, and even lost hearing in one of his ears from a childhood injury exacerbated by the fights. After a final NHL season in 2015 to 2016, he clashed with Arizona's coach and saw limited action. Downey found himself out of contracts at just 29 years old. His career was effectively over, and he was left to grapple with the aftermath. Retirement, or more accurately being unwanted in the league, was an incredibly dark time for Steve Downey. The high adrenaline life of an NHL agitator gave way to reflections and the surfacing of long-term trauma. Downey sank into depression, barely leaving his house, days filled with fog, as he later described. The physical injuries were bad enough themselves, constant headaches, memory gaps, the deaf ear, but the mental scars were worse. He never truly confronted the tragedy of his youth. At 8 years old, Downey's father died in a car crash while driving him to a hockey practice, a horrific event that Downey essentially walled off emotionally. He only knew one way to cope: throw himself deeper into hockey, into being the tough guy, the fighter. Now hockey was gone, and the grief and the anger came roaring back. In late 2016, fans got a window in Downey's inner turmoil when he took to Twitter in an extensive rant. He targeted legendary commentator Don Cherry, accusing Cherry's Rock'em Sock'em videos of glorifying violence and misleading kids like himself about what it takes to make the NHL. That hit is what happens when you watch Don Cherry from age 5 to 18. I just did what I had to play, Downey wrote, astonishingly expressing regret for the McAmmond hit that he had never publicly shown remorse before. Wish I never played, he added, a gut-punch admission from someone who reached the NHL because of those hits. He also blasted Cherry for calling him a pussy, on Coach's Corner for wearing a visor. Downey had begun wearing one after an eye injury. Downey didn't stop there. He aired grievances against the Arizona Coyotes organization, hinting at mismanagement and lack of support, perhaps referencing how his final coach, Dave Tippett, healthy scratched and marginalized him. This Twitter rant was both shocking and revealing. Here was a player unloading years of bitterness at hockey culture. Some fans were sympathetic, viewing Downey as a broken man, finally telling hard truths. Others dismissed the rant of a bitter ex-player. After that outburst, Downey disappeared from public eye for a while, and it turned out he was seeking help. He connected with former Flyer teammate Riley Coate, who had been advocating alternative therapies for ex-players dealing with trauma. In 2019, Downey Downey quietly joined Coat at a retreat in Jamaica to undergo supervised psilocybin, basically magic mushroom therapy, an emerging treatment for mental health issues like PTSD and depression. The experience was transformative. Downey later spoke about it to KAF Health News and ESPN. I felt like something in me was broken. I got tired of going to the doctors and taking the pills, he said, noting traditional antidepressants and painkillers weren't helping. The psychedelic treatment allowed him to confront the trauma of his father's death and his hockey experiences in a way he never had. He revisited the memory of the car accident as an adult, processed it, and came out feeling a weight lifted off him. He also gained clarity on his hockey career. The man who once embraced being a villain now openly lamented how the sports culture had nearly destroyed him. When I look back, I'm disgusted, he tweeted about his famous cheap shot, directly linking it to Cherry's influence. As of 2025, Steve Downey's life is on a far calmer plane. At 36, he lives in Ontario and keeps a low profile. Those who are close to him say he is in a better headspace than he has ever been in years. He remains retired from hockey with zero intention of coaching or staying involved in the professional ranks. Steve Downey's story exposed the darker undercurrents of hockey culture, violence, trauma, and personal reckoning. Dustin Penner, by contrast, brought a lighter, more unconventional presence to the game, mixing timely playoff contributions with off-ice moments that made him both a punchline and a fan favorite.
Dustin Penner sat down for some delicious homemade pancakes that his wife had made, and back spasms attacked him and he had to miss a game, and Pancake Gate was then born.
The career of Dusty Penner is a study in contrasts and comic relief. From undrafted obscurity to two-time Stanley Cup champion, from being publicly criticized for a perceived lack of effort, to becoming a minor internet celebrity for his sense of humor, Dustin Penner carved a unique space in the hockey world, one where playoff heroics and pancake jokes somehow coexisted. Penner's path to the NHL was unlikely from the start. He was never selected in the draft and had quit hockey as a teenager before giving it another go at a tiny junior college. A standout season at the University of Maine caught the Anaheim Ducks' eye, and they signed the towering 6'4" winger in 2004. By 2007, Penner was a key contributor on Anaheim's top line and helped the Ducks win the first Stanley Cup, chipping in 3 goals in the finals that year. With size, a soft set of hands, and a knack for planting himself in front of the net, Penner looked like a late-blooming forward, so much so that the Edmonton Oilers offered him a lucrative $4.25 million a year contract that summer, which Anaheim, tight against the cap, declined to match. Suddenly, the undrafted kid was subject of a bidding war and arrived in Edmonton with huge expectations and a hefty contract on his shoulders. In Edmonton, Penner's time was a roller coaster. He led the Oilers in scoring in his first year, but faced constant scrutiny from then coach Craig McTavish, who delivered a public critique in 2008, saying Penner was out of shape and uninspired. McTavish famously said that Penner possessed all the tools but an empty toolbox. The media ran with the narrative of Penner being lazy, an image Penner didn't help by occasionally showing up to camp, a bit heavier than ideal. Yet he also had a career year in 2009 to 2010, with 32 goals, proving he could dominate when motivated. Fans were divided. Was Penner an underappreciated talent, caught in a dysfunctional Oilers era, or a coasting big man who played hard in spurts? The truth, as usual, laid somewhere in between. Penner himself often acknowledged that he wasn't a gym rat, and that his laid-back personality could be mistaken for his lack of passion. At the 2011 trade deadline, the Oilers sent Penner to the Los Angeles Kings, where a fresh chapter and a bizarre saga awaited. Early in his LA tenure, Penner made more headlines for breakfast than hockey. In January 2012, Penner announced that he had thrown out his back while leaning over to eat a stack of his wife's pancakes, leaving him unable to play. The story was so absurd, it seemed like a joke, and many thought it was, but Penner and Kings confirmed the back spasms were real. The tale of Pancake Gate became an instant joke in the NHL, cementing Penner's image as quirky and not a serious character. To his credit, Penner owned the joke. He wrote a tongue-in-cheek open letter about the perils of delicious pancakes, and even hosted a charity breakfast event called Pancakes with Penner to raise money for a good cause. On the ice, Penner's tenure with LA started slowly, but when the 2012 playoffs rolled around, he proved his worth. Slotted in a depth role, he stepped up with several clutch performances, including the series-winning overtime goal in the Western Conference Finals. The Kings went on to win the Stanley Cup, giving Penner his second ring. Teammates praised his positive locker room presence and ability to come through in big moments, even if his regular season stats didn't always shine. After another year shuttling between the Kings and the Ducks, as he returned back to Anaheim in 2013 to 2014, he was surprisingly effective, notching 13 goals in 49 games before a trade to Washington. By 2014, he was a free agent without offers, and at age 32, he quietly slipped into what looked like retirement. But true to his unpredictable form, Penner's post-NHL life took some unusual turns. He became active on Twitter, cultivating a following with a mix of self-deprecating hockey commentary and offbeat humor. However, he also was in some controversy. In 2015, just as he was set to appear on TSN as a guest analyst for the trade deadline day, Penner fired off a series of off-color jokes about sexual assault on Twitter, supposedly riffing on a conversation with his girlfriend. The backlash was immediate and fierce. TSN cancelled his appearance. Penner issued public apologies, admitting his attempt at humor was in poor taste and acknowledged it might have hurt survivors. The incident tarnished his media career. Penner stepped away from the spotlight. He took time to reassess and ended up making a major life pivot, enrolling in college, where he studied digital communications. He later on went to marry his girlfriend, whom he credits for helping him to grow. The one-time NHL wildcard is now a family man. However, Penner is completely not out of hockey yet. He pops up at Ducks and Kings events occasionally, and has given a few interviews on his unique career. Penner has admitted that he understands why coaches got frustrated with him at times. "I wasn't the most consistent, and I know that," he admitted, but he also takes pride in what he achieved. Not many undrafted players end up with 2 cups and over 150 NHL goals. As of 2025, Penner is a family man, but hasn't ruled out returning to hockey in some capacity, perhaps coaching kids, but he's in no rush. Penner seems perfectly happy being a husband, dad, and a guy who can poke fun at his past without being defined by it. Hockey moves fast. Every season brings new stars to cheer for, and just as quickly, familiar names fade into the background. But those players we once watched with excitement don't simply vanish. They keep going, and often far from the spotlight, building new lives with the same grit and drive that once got them to the NHL. Each of the players we went over today had to accept a different ending than the one they dreamed of. And yet, in their own way, they all found a second chapter, one that doesn't show up on highlight reels, but matters just as much, enduring and finding meaning beyond the rink. Before the end of the video, I quickly wanted to say thank you guys for all your support on the latest videos, and if you did enjoy this video, consider liking, subscribing to the channel. It's free and you can unsubscribe at any time. If you do want to support the channel further, I have enabled channel memberships, which are basically monthly subscriptions that can support my work at a monthly basis. There are currently 3 tiers, and I'm looking to add more benefits for each one of them, like members first videos and stuff like that. So if you want to support the channel a little extra, the option is there. However, again, it's not required at all. You guys watching the videos, the liking, subscribing, and just being here a lot already, so say thank you for that. Anyways, enough with the rambling. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one.